You'd think I'd be better at it. I've been doing this since, let's see, I got paid the first time in 1963, so that's over 10 years now, right? I think we've played in 44 or 45 states in several foreign countries. And eventually you run out of things to write about, so I wound up writing about what I do. Sitting in the drive-thru lane at Wendy's listening to the radio. It's 32 degrees and they're calling for this rain to turn to snow. I got one good wiper blade, a cup of coffee, and 100 miles to go before I feel your loving arms or taste your sweet lips kissing me hello. Well, I'd have been home by now, but the van ran out of gas on 26. The gauge is broken. Yeah, I know you told me that I ought to get it fixed. Got the Appalachian Mountains yet to cross in what they call a wintry mix. So say a prayer for me in this old van. The tires are getting pretty slick. Say a prayer for this old pilgrim out here on the road tonight. Say a prayer for all the children who have no one to hold them tight. Don't forget about the soldiers and their loved ones who've gone on. And then say a prayer for peace and that we all make it safely home. Well, I made a little money on this trip, sold a few CDs, made some new friends out in Texas, saw some old friends here in Tennessee. I'll admit the snow looks pretty in the headlights shining on the trees. I just hope they get the salt trucks rolling before the asphalt starts to freeze. Say a prayer for this old pilgrim out here on the road tonight. Say a prayer for all the children who have no one to hold them tight. Don't forget about the soldiers and their loved ones who've gone on. And then say a prayer for peace and that we all make it safely home. I'll say a prayer for peace and that we all make it safely home. Thank you very much. Y'all are lucky you don't have far to go to be home, do you? Well, I'll start you out with more information than you require, maybe. I was conceived in North Carolina and born in Tennessee, so I'm bilingual. My people are off in the mountains of western North Carolina. Just go over there to the Blue Ridge and go south till you get to Asheville, and then go just a little bit further, and you'll be where my people are from. My dad's from Mitchell County, A lot of people don't know where Mitchell County is till I say you've heard of Mount Mitchell, the tallest mountain east of the Rockies. That's not in Mitchell County, but you probably heard of it. But my mother's from Buncombe County, and everybody in America knows where Buncombe County is when I say that's where Asheville is, because all their children live there now. It's crazy what's happening down there. But I grew up in, outside a little town in East Tennessee called Morristown. And we lived out in the country. It was great. We had a little farm. My dad was a textile engineer. He worked at a rayon plant that the Dutch had built in western North Carolina. They built one where all my mama's people were from. And then in 1948, the year I was born, they built that one in Tennessee, and my dad got transferred over there. So I grew up on that side of the Blue Ridge over there. And it was great living out there in the country. My best friend lived on an adjoining farm. Now, we lived up on the hill up there where it started getting bumpy, but he lived down by the river, and his pasture was flat, and ours was not. So you could play baseball in his pasture without just chasing the ball all the time, you know. It was great, and he had horses, and he had baseball gloves and all that. And his name was Billy Ray Lapham, L-A-F-U-M, Lapham. I've asked people all over America if they've ever heard that surname, and nobody yet has heard that, and I think maybe they just had a speech impediment. I don't know. But anyway, Billy Ray and I were just the best friends, and when we were 10 years old, we went to the grammar school. It was, it wasn't that far from where we lived. It seemed like a long way back then. I don't know who designed school bus routes in the 1950s in East Tennessee, but it seemed like we came by here on the way home. It just took forever, you know, at 30 miles an hour and then around. So I'd just get off at Billy Ray's house because he had all the good stuff to play with anyway. And then if I'd have ridden the school bus all the way around the hill and around like that to my house, by the time I got home, it'd be time to get back on the bus and go back to school, you know. So I just get off at Billy Ray's house. Now, Billy Ray's father and my father both worked at the rayon plant. My dad was an engineer, and his dad fixed viscous pumps, whatever that was. Anyway, they got off at 3:30. We got off at 3:30, but by the time we got home, they'd already been home for an hour or so, you know. Now, Billy Ray's dad was a really great fella. He had a bunch of old cars up on blocks around their house in the yard there. You know, now that I think about it, pretty much everybody in East Tennessee at that time had a bunch of old cars in the yard, but his dad actually worked on them. He had found a hobby that helped pay for itself. He worked on 4950 and 51 Ford V8 flatheads. And any time a car that fit that description met its demise within about a 9-county area, he'd take his old wrecker and haul that hulk in there in the yard, unhook it, and then he'd get his oxyacetylene torch and start cutting all the bad parts off of it. Throw all those parts out in the woods. And then he'd like take the front end of a white one and weld it together with the back end of a black one. And then he'd put like a green door on this side and a yellow door on that side and a purple trunk, you know, and a yellow hood on it. And my mother called them Madras cars. Just anytime he could get one enough pieces put together that would run, he had a placard that he'd made out of the bottom of a beer crate with a shoe dauber. And he had written on it, fishing car. To this day, I'm not sure what makes a car a fishing car, but evidently there was a demand for them because he sold one or two every once in a while. Fishing car, and then under that, of course, CHEEP with an exclamation point, cheap. And he'd put that under the passenger side wiper blade and set it out there in front of the house, and eventually some old boy would come by and look at it and go, you know, I've been needing a fishing car. And he was always working on another one. And, of course, Billy Ray and I loved to play in those old cars sitting around there because as soon as we got in one of those old Ford Flathead V8s, it would magically turn into a gold Eldorado Cadillac. And I would turn into Jerry Lee Lewis, and he'd turn into Elvis, and we'd drive around Memphis in the yard there waving at our fans. It was great. We'd pretend the radio worked. You know, it's wonderful.
But Billy Ray's dad, he said, boys, now stay out of them old cars. He said, don't be getting in them cars. There's liable to be snakes in there. Well, we were 10-year-old boys. We were looking for snakes, you know. But he said, and beside that, he said, where I've cut them old parts off with that torch, it's rusted up. He says, you'll cut yourself and get lockjaw. I never knew anybody that had lockjaw, but it didn't sound like anything you'd want like at Thanksgiving, you know. But we knew how to get in those cars. All we had to do was just wait. Just be patient. We'd play ball around there in the driveway, whatever. Just be patient. But it was always fun to watch him work on those cars. He was a genuine shade tree mechanic. He didn't have a roof over anything. All he had was a big oak tree in the backyard. And he had one of those big double-decker red Sears Craftsman toolboxes chained to that tree with a tarpaulin over it. And that's where he kept all his tools. He'd tell us, boys, don't never buy nothing but Craftsman tools. He said, guaranteed for life. And he took care of his tools. He taught us about that. Had a chain fall on one of the limbs of that big oak tree so he could pull engines and transmissions out of those old cars. And I remember we got off the school bus one day and he had got him another car. Had the hood off of it and he was pulling the motor up out of that car. Well, there was a man sitting there in a late model Chevrolet pickup truck sitting on the tailgate, peeling a tangerine and watching him pull that motor out of that car. We didn't know who he was, just sitting there watching Billy Ray's dad. So we thought, well, that's good. So we walked over there and we were watching too. Well, I walked up next to Billy Ray's dad and I said, hey, Mr. Latham. He said, hey there, Buckle. I said, you're pulling the motor out of this car, ain't you? He went, you are a genius. I said, what are you going to do with it? He said, this man in this late model Chevrolet truck's come to get it. I said, can you put a Ford V8 flathead in a late model Chevrolet pickup truck? And he looked at me and said, of course you can. In the bed. I said, well, I guess he's going to put it in a Ford somewhere. He said, nope, motor's blowed up. I said, why in the world does he want a blowed up Ford V8 motor? And Mr. Latham looked at me like I was the biggest idiot in East Tennessee and said, son, everybody in the world knows that a Ford V8 flathead makes the best houseboat anchor in the world. We were learning every time we got up against that fella. But now, we knew, as I say, we knew when it was going to be time for us to turn into Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis Presley, because at 5:30 every day, Monday through Friday, the back screen door would screech open, and Billy Ray's mom would be standing there drying her hands on her apron, and she'd look out there at her husband and go, hey, darling, I got your supper ready. Get in here. And the door would slam, and Billy Ray's dad would stop whatever he was doing instantly. And he'd clean those tools and put them in that roll-around toolbox, and then he'd go over there and wash his hands at that spigot at the back door. He used Tide laundry detergent to wash all that grease off. Rub it in like that, and it'd turn white all the way from here down there. And he would stand there and let it work like that, and then he'd sing, bringing in the sheaves, bringing in the sheaves. That was how he timed it. He'd sing bringing in the sheaves through twice, and then he would take that water and rinse off the, it looked like a debutante going to a cotillion. Looked beautiful. Anyway, he'd wash all that off, and then he'd go in the back door to the kitchen, and Billy Ray and I'd follow him over there, and we'd sit down on the back porch steps, and he would walk in the kitchen where his darling wife had his supper made. Now, as far as I know, every Monday through Friday for many years, Billy Ray's dad ate exactly the same thing for supper. 2 fried hot dog sandwiches on white toast with yellow mustard. Now, if any of you ladies would like to see me after the program, I'd be glad to give you the recipe. And she always had them cut diagonally because she read the Ladies' Home Journal. Had them stacked on a paper plate, and he'd walk in there, and sitting right next to that paper plate was a 16-ounce Pabst Blue Ribbon that she had church keyed open for him. Had it sitting right there beside his supper, and he'd look at that, and he'd go, darling, you know you were the best thing that's ever happened to this old boy right here. Come here. And she'd lean over, and he'd give her some jaw sugar, and he'd say, darling, this one's for you. And he'd reach and get that cold beer, and he'd go, That's so cold it bust enamel off your teeth. Just the way I like it. Come here. And he'd give her another big kiss there, and then he'd get his hot dog sandwiches and put them on this hand and get his beer, and then he'd start for the living room. Now, if I had to describe the Lathams, Mrs. Latham was about that big around, and Billy Ray's dad, if they stood together, they looked like the numeral 10. Well, Billy Ray's dad would head for the living room with his supper, and by that time, Billy Ray and I are up, and we're looking in the kitchen window watching him go because there's a case opening going into the living room, and he was headed for his chair. Now, Mr. Latham's chair was a Birkline recliner covered in brown naugahyde and black electrician's tape. Now, he would walk in there, and he would take up a position just to the right of the chair. Now, his hands were full, so he couldn't operate the lever on the side that caused it to recline. And he always wanted it to be reclined before he got in it because that was his procedure. So he would just pretend that lever on the side of his chair was a lever on an old 650 Triumph motorcycle, and he'd start kicking it. And like an old Triumph motorcycle, it'd take about 30 kicks, but finally it would go into action and recline. And then he would move forward one good step, and he'd get abreast of the footstool part, and he'd begin swaying left and right. And he'd get that mass to moving, and pretty soon that outside foot would start coming off the floor. And I'd say to Billy Ray, "Your daddy's going to go over." He'd say, "Daddy will say, but you wait." And finally, he'd go way over to the right, and you'd think he was going to fall on the floor, but he'd kick that left leg up, and the next thing you know, he was a straddle of the footstool part. And then he'd work himself down into the chair and set his hot dog sandwiches on his stomach, and he'd set his beer on the end table next to him. Now, the only other thing on that end table was a Philco record player. And he would reach over and unlatch it and swing the top back and reach down in and turn it on, and we would hear it go till it reached exactly 45 revolutions per minute. And then Billy Ray and I would just go sit down on the steps and wait. And we would hear, "Hear that lonesome whippoorwill, she sounds too blue to fly." Because we knew that eventually we would hear, "I'm so lonesome I could cry." Hear that lonesome whip. And we'd sit there sometime through 15 versions of Hank Williams singing, "I'm so lonesome I could cry." But we were patient because we knew that eventually we would hear, "I'm so lonesome I could cry." And we were in those cars. Sheep in the meadow and the cows in the corn, fish in the river and a horse in the barn. And I was 12 years old, living in the country, with a blue tick hound and a chestnut mare. Me and Billy Ray, you know, were loaded for bear on a Saturday, living in the country. And when you're 12 years old, living in the country, seemed like the only place to be. The work's all done and we're headed for the river, and we're gonna catch all the fish in eastern Tennessee. Billy Ray and me sneaking cigarettes, sitting under the stars and talking about the day we're gonna get cars and be on our way. I'm gonna have a Chevrolet, a 55 Bel Air with baby moons and the radio on playing rock and roll tunes. I'll be hard to hold when I get 16. But when you're 12 years old living in the country, seem like the only place to be. The work's all done and we're headed for the river, and we're gonna catch all the fish in eastern Tennessee, Billy Ray and me. Well, the years rolled by and there came the day that I went away, and old Billy Ray stayed on his daddy's farm. But the country couldn't hold me. But now I've seen all the places that I wanted to see, but I ain't seen nothing like East Tennessee, and I'm glad to say I'm back in the country. 'Cause when you get my age living in the country, it seemed like the only place to be. The work's all done and we're headed for the river, and we're gonna catch all the fish in eastern Tennessee, Billy Ray and me. Thank you very much.